Chapter 12. The Pressure Point. The spreadsheets on my screen seemed to mock me. Columns of figures, budget forecasts, variance reports for the Veridian Ballet Company. Data that should, by all rights, tell a clear story. But the narrative emerging from these numbers felt increasingly fractured, illogical. It was early March now, weeks after the glittering success of the annual gala. Yet the satisfaction of exceeding fundraising targets, partly thanks to the signed Pointe shoe initiative I'd spearheaded, had entirely evaporated, replaced by a persistent, gnawing unease. Outside my Stonewall development office window, the New England city skyline was etched against a pale, late-winter sky. Winter clung on stubbornly this year. Though the days were incrementally longer, the light still felt thin, and down on the streets, dirty snowbanks lingered in the shadows, feeding slushy meltwater into the gutters. A raw wind likely still whipped around the corners of the Veridian's old brick building miles away, a world apart from this hermetically sealed tower of corporate finance, where I usually wrestled with figures far larger, yet somehow less troubling. My discreet inquiries into Veridian's financials had hit successive walls. Polite emails to Henderson or Albright in their finance department requesting detailed breakdowns of supplier payments or inventory reconciliation for Pointe shoes were met with vague promises, followed by incomplete data or claims of needing more time due to, quote, complex accounting structures specific to artistic enterprises. It felt like deliberate obfuscation, a bureaucratic smokescreen I recognized from less savory corporate dealings. The Pointe shoe anomaly remained stubbornly unexplained. Expenditures logged suggested a near-constant flood of premium shoes, while Martha the costumer's quiet desperation, the dancers' visibly worn equipment, and the surprisingly meager collection of presentable retired shoes for the signing project all screamed scarcity and substitution. Adding another layer of complexity was Elena Laurent. Her fiery confrontation in the corridor after that disastrous Giselle rehearsal had cut through my analytical detachment. "Do you factor the human cost into your spreadsheets, Mr. Stonewall?" The memory of her voice, raw with anger and fierce protection of her fellow dancers, had replayed in my mind frequently these past weeks, tangling uncomfortably with the charged moment we'd shared on the gala balcony. That near kiss in the snow, an unresolved chord humming beneath my professional objectivity. I found myself thinking about her more often than was prudent. Her discipline, her grace, the vulnerability glimpsed beneath that fiercely controlled exterior, the undeniable spark between us. It made everything messier. I respected her fire, admired her artistry, was undeniably drawn to her. Yet her defensiveness, coupled with the persistent financial questions, kept a sliver of suspicion alive. Was she merely protective? Or was she guarding more than just her colleagues' privacy? The pressure was mounting. My father had already inquired twice, politely but pointedly, about my progress on the Veridian assessment. He expected clarity, efficiency, the kind of decisive analysis that characterized our operations. "Find the inefficiency, Julian, or confirm sound management. Simple," he'd said. But it wasn't simple. It felt tangled, opaque, and I felt increasingly isolated, trying to unravel it from within the Veridian structure, where I was still perceived, despite my board role, as something of an outsider. The finance guy, the Stonewall emissary. I needed an ally, or at least, a sounding board on the board itself. Someone less likely to be part of the established management structure. Someone potentially more open to acknowledging that things might not be as they seemed. My thoughts settled on Alexander Devereaux. Alex, younger than most board members, independently wealthy, seemed genuinely passionate about the ballet, asked perceptive questions in meetings, and valued authenticity. It was a long shot. But perhaps Alex had his own insights, his own questions. Maybe he knew something about the dancers' late-night excursions. Or at least wouldn't be shocked by the possibility. It felt like a calculated risk worth taking. I reached out, suggesting a casual drink, framing it as wanting to compare notes between newer board members, discuss upcoming season planning. He agreed readily. We settled on the Oak Room, a quiet, wood-paneled bar tucked away in a boutique hotel downtown. Discreet, comfortable, conducive to potentially sensitive conversation. Stepping into the Oak Room later that week felt like entering a different era. Low lighting gleamed on dark wood and polished brass. Plush leather armchairs were arranged in intimate groupings. The air smelled faintly of expensive whiskey, old leather, and wood smoke from the fireplace crackling softly at the far end of the room. Through the tall windows, I could see the early evening settling over the city, streetlights beginning to glow against the twilight sky, reflecting wetly on pavements cleared of snow but still damp from the day's thaw. The atmosphere was hushed, confidential, a world away from the controlled chaos of the Veridian studios, or the high-pressure buzz of the Stonewall Tower. It was the perfect neutral ground. I secured a quiet corner table, and had just ordered a scotch when Alex arrived, punctual as always. He moved with an easy confidence, dressed in effortlessly expensive casual wear that still managed to look sharper than most people's business attire. He greeted me with a warm handshake and a ready smile. "Julian, good to see you," he said, sliding into the armchair opposite me. "Glad we could finally connect outside of those interminable board meetings." "Likewise, Alex," I replied, signaling the waiter. "Thanks for making the time. Busy season?" "Always," he grinned, "especially post-gala. Heard your signed shoe initiative was a monster success, by the way. Brilliant idea. People were fighting over Petrov's pair." "It was the perfect opening. Glad it helped the bottom line," I said, keeping my tone light. "Every bit counts over there, as you know." I paused as the waiter delivered Alex's drink, which actually touches on why I wanted to chat, informally. I leaned forward slightly, lowering my voice. "As I get deeper into the financials for the committee, beyond the gala specifics, I'm encountering some complexities, some operational aspects that seem less than optimal." I watched his reaction carefully, keeping my language deliberately neutral for now. This was the first step onto thinner ice. Alex leaned back in the plush leather armchair, taking a slow sip of his old-fashioned. The brief flicker of surprise in his eyes at my pivot from gala success to operational concerns was quickly masked by polite attentiveness. But I sensed I had his full focus now. The quiet clink of ice in his glass was one of the few sounds breaking the hushed atmosphere of the oak room. "It's just that," I began, swirling the amber liquid in my own glass. "As I delve deeper into the financial oversight role for the committee, and frankly, applying the same due diligence I'd use at Stonewall Development, I'm encountering certain operational areas that seem unusually complex." I paused, gauging his reaction. "Perhaps less transparent than one might expect." Alex merely nodded thoughtfully, his gaze steady on mine. "Complex? How?" he prompted quietly, inviting elaboration without judgment. Encouraged by his receptiveness, I continued. "Well, for instance, I'm seeing some significant variances in certain operational expense lines that are proving difficult to fully reconcile against performance metrics or industry benchmarks, particularly concerning consumables essential supplies." I hesitated fractionally before naming it. "Pointe shoes, specifically. The expenditure rate seems disproportionately high, even accounting for Veridian's demanding repertoire and dancer needs." I watched him closely. His expression remained thoughtful as he took another sip of his drink. "Pointe shoes," he repeated musingly. "I wouldn't have guessed that would be a major line item, but I suppose for a company this size, it adds up considerably." He paused, swirling the cherry in his glass. "Interesting you mention variances. I wouldn't know the benchmarks, of course, but purely from observation." He looked up, meeting my eyes again. "And the dancers certainly seem pushed to their absolute physical limit this season, wouldn't you agree? Especially with Giselle coming up. Or perhaps the intensity is just shredding through equipment at an unprecedented rate?" He was offering a plausible, innocent explanation. Was he genuinely suggesting it, or subtly probing my own knowledge? I decided to address it directly, while introducing the next layer of concern. "That's certainly a contributing factor," I conceded, nodding. "The physical demands are immense. I see that every time I observe rehearsal." I thought of Elena's exhaustion during that failed Giselle run-through, the visible strain in her movements despite her technical precision. But the rate of increase in logged expenditure seems to outpace even the intensified schedule. And compounding that, I chose my words carefully, I'm experiencing some challenges obtaining transparent, timely data from the finance department regarding the specifics, procurement processes, detailed inventory controls, supplier payment confirmations. The responses are slower, more opaque than I'd expect for standard operational oversight. The fireplace crackled in the momentary silence as Alex considered this. He frowned slightly now, leaning back in his chair. "Opaque?" he repeated. "That is concerning. Henderson in finance always struck me as rather by the book, perhaps a bit overwhelmed, but not deliberately obstructive. He paused. Then Albright, who handles most of the day-to-day payables now, I believe? She seems competent enough, though perhaps overworked like everyone there. He tapped a finger against his glass. Budget tightness is a constant refrain on the donor circuit, Julian, you know that. Heard it again just last week at the symphony benefit. Everyone praises Armand's artistic vision, but there are always whispers about whether the company is living slightly beyond its means, relying too heavily on last-minute gala rescues or Stonewall underwriting. He gave me a pointed look. Maybe the finance department is simply stretched too thin, struggling to provide the level of detailed reporting you're accustomed to? Again, a plausible explanation, but it didn't fully align with the specific anomalies I was seeing, nor with Martha's stressed caution, and Alex's mention of budget tightness versus Armand's artistic vision. That was interesting. An allocation issue? Funds prioritized for new productions over essential supplies or dancer support? He wasn't being defensive of management, I noted internally. He acknowledges the strain on the dancers and the budget rumors. Time to push a little further. Link the financial data back to the human element. Perhaps, I allowed. But the resource allocation itself raises questions. I'm hearing persistent, anecdotal reports, and frankly, it aligns with my own observations during rehearsals, of significant dancer fatigue, beyond the norm, even for this level of work. I thought of Ashland's pale face, the slight tremor in Elena's supporting leg that Volkov had mercilessly criticized. When dancers are consistently pushed past their limits, whether due to scheduling, inadequate recovery support, or even faulty equipment, I added pointedly, it inevitably impacts performance consistency, raises injury risks, and ultimately affects the company's core asset, the artists themselves. It becomes a question of sustainable operation, not just budget lines. Alex nodded slowly, his expression growing more serious. I agree completely. I've noticed the fatigue myself at recent sponsor events. Some of the dancers, they looked utterly drained. Brilliant smiles, of course, but you could see the exhaustion behind their eyes. He sighed, the sound almost lost beneath the low jazz now playing in the background. Armand's ambition is boundless, and Volkov demands absolute perfection, which is admirable in its way, but I sometimes wonder if the human cost gets overlooked in the pursuit of artistic glory. He looked thoughtful, perhaps investing more in dancer wellness programs, physical therapy access, nutrition, and schedule management. Maybe that's where the focus should be, rather than just pouring everything into new sets for Armand's next magnum opus. His response gave me the confidence to delve into the specific discrepancy that bothered me most. It's the lack of clear correlation that I keep coming back to, Alex, I said, lowering my voice slightly again. Take the shoes, for instance. The most basic, essential tool for these dancers after their own bodies. The logged expenditure, as I mentioned, suggests a very high replacement rate with premium brands. Yet, I paused, recalling Martha's carefully chosen words, the image of Morales's battered shoes, Elena's comment about presentable retired pairs. What I hear indirectly from wardrobe, and what I sometimes observe myself, doesn't seem to consistently align with that. There are hints of supply issues, inconsistent quality reaching the dancers, shoes being used far longer than the budget would imply they should need to be. I leaned forward again, meeting his gaze directly. The costumer, Martha, seems to be performing miracles keeping dancers adequately shod with the resources apparently reaching her actual department. There's a disconnect between the documented expense and the tangible reality. Alex frowned, swirling the ice in his now empty glass. He signaled the waiter almost absently for another round before turning back to me, his easygoing demeanor replaced by sharp focus. A disconnect, he repeated slowly. Between logged premium expense and actual supply reaching the dancers? He shook his head slightly. That doesn't sound like simple inefficiency, Julian. That sounds problematic. He waited until the waiter had delivered fresh drinks and retreated before continuing, his voice lower now. Are you suggesting discrepancies in purchasing, or inventory going missing? I'm not suggesting anything specific yet, I replied carefully, backing away slightly from explicit accusation, just noting a significant lack of correlation that needs explanation. The data is noisy. It's difficult to track specific deliveries against specific payments through the reports I've received so far. I decided to add the final layer, the one that felt most speculative but also potentially most revealing. A new waiter passed by with drinks for another table, and I waited for him to move out of earshot before continuing. And compounding the fatigue issue, I hesitated, choosing my words with extreme care. There also seem to be patterns of Unusual schedules for some dancers, late hours that aren't accounted for on official rehearsal calls. I watched his face intently, looking for any flicker of recognition. Late nights that likely contribute significantly to the fatigue we both observe, and potentially impact company resources, equipment wear, injury rates, in ways that aren't immediately obvious on the balance sheet. Something shifted in his eyes. Surprise? Recognition? But his expression remained carefully neutral. This was the most sensitive point, hinting at dancer behavior outside the company's purview. The very unprofessional conduct rumors the board sometimes whispered about. Would this trigger defensiveness, disbelief, or confirmation? Alex's acknowledgement that the situation sounded problematic rather than merely inefficient was the opening I needed. He hadn't dismissed my concerns. If anything, his thoughtful frown suggested he might harbor his own questions beneath his usually affable exterior. It felt like the moment to push further, to share the piece of physical evidence that had shifted my investigation from budget analysis towards something more concrete, more clandestine. I took a slow sip of my scotch, the peaty warmth doing little to ease the knot of tension in my stomach. This is the gamble, I thought. Reveal the flyer, and I moved from standard financial scrutiny into potentially unfounded conspiracy theories. But if Alex recognizes it, if he knows anything, the potential gain felt worth the risk, especially given the dead ends I was hitting elsewhere. Speaking of late nights and unusual patterns, I began, keeping my voice low and even, leaning forward slightly across the polished dark wood of the table. My frustration with the lack of clear data led me to do some informal observation recently. I watched his face carefully. No judgment there, just attentive curiosity. Late one evening, after losing track of a car service picking up several dancers near the theater, I was in that warehouse district south of here. I paused, then reached into the inner pocket of my jacket, my fingers closing around the stiff, slightly crumpled cardstock, and I found this. I carefully placed the black flyer on the table between our drinks, smoothing it out slightly. The silver symbol that stylized moon and flame gleamed faintly, even in the bar's dim, ambient light. The single word beneath it, Nocturne, looked stark, deliberate. I slid it closer to him. Mean anything to you? Alex picked up the card, his movements unhurried, but I saw a flicker of recognition cross his features before his usual composed expression took over. He turned the thick card over in his fingers, studying the symbol, then the name. The only sounds were the low murmur of conversation from the far corner of the bar, the crackle of the fireplace, the soft clink of ice as someone nearby stirred their drink. Nocturne, he said finally, his voice softer now. He looked up at me, his eyes sharp, analytical. Damn! Yes, I have heard whispers about this place. He tapped the card with a thoughtful finger. Very exclusive apparently, very underground. Doesn't advertise. Strictly word of mouth or maybe cards like this. He studied the card more closely, running his thumb over the embossed silver design. Supposedly hosts some incredible, rather avant-garde performances. Music, dance, things that wouldn't fly on a mainstream stage. Attracts a certain crowd. He hesitated. Wealthy, yes, but more influential maybe? Artists, financiers looking for an edge. People who value discretion and novelty. Quote, his recognition, the details he provided, exclusive, underground, avant-garde performances, influential crowd, sent a chill down my spine that had nothing to do with the lingering winter outside. This wasn't just some late-night dive bar. This sounded significant, organized, potentially lucrative for performers. I found it on the street, I explained, keeping my voice level, sticking to facts. Late at night, in the exact area where I lost track of the car service that had just picked up Tommy and Ashland from the theater district. I let him draw his own conclusions. Alex absorbed this, his expression growing more complex. The dim lighting of the oak room cast shadows across his face as he leaned back, swirling his drink again. Ivanov and Ashland, he murmured. Heading to Nocturne? Him. He shook his head slightly. Why? It was the question I'd been wrestling with. I voiced it directly. That's what I can't figure out, Alex. Why would dancers from Veridian be frequenting, or, more disturbingly, possibly even performing at, a place like Nocturne? And why the intense secrecy? Why the discreet car service instead of a taxi? Alex was silent for a long moment, staring into his drink as if seeking answers in the amber liquid. Then he began thinking aloud, cycling through possibilities, much as I had myself. The money, perhaps? He mused, his voice just audible above the quiet piano music that had begun playing. It's no secret Veridian's salaries aren't extravagant, even for the principals. But it was at or above market rate, wasn't it? Maybe performing at a high-end, exclusive place like Nocturne pays exceptionally well? Enough to justify the hours? The risk? He considered this. It possible? Or, he continued, shifting gears, maybe it's artistic. Volkov is brilliant, a master of classicism, but he's notoriously rigid. Perhaps Nocturne offers them a space for artistic freedom? A chance to experiment with different styles? Something more modern? More expressive? Something Veridian under Volkov and Armand would never allow? He leaned forward again. I've seen glimpses of that fiery, untamed quality in some of them. Ivanov, certainly. Maybe even Laurent. Beneath that incredible control, perhaps Nocturne is where they let that out? The mention of Elena struck a chord. I recalled her frustrated struggle in rehearsal, Volkov's harsh criticism. You are calculating the angle of your despair. Her rigid control preventing the emotional abandon the role required. Was there another side to her that emerged somewhere else? Somewhere like Nocturne? Could be simple rebellion too, Alex added thoughtfully, interrupting my thoughts. The pressure at Veridian is immense. The discipline, the scrutiny, the constant demand for perfection. Maybe Nocturne is just escape, a place to be someone else, anonymous, shed the weight of expectation, especially for someone like... He paused tactfully, but the implication of Edith Petrov and her legacy family hung in the air. Or maybe, his voice lowered slightly, it's just the thrill. Dancing is their lifeblood. Maybe dancing on a different kind of edge, somewhere forbidden, holds its own allure. He covered all the possibilities I'd considered, but hearing them voiced by someone else, someone familiar with both the ballet world's pressures and the city's undercurrents, made them feel more real, more plausible, and more dangerous. Whatever the reason, Alex said, his tone becoming serious, pragmatic, the secrecy is paramount for them, obviously. Because if word got out, my God! He shook his head again. Imagine the fallout if patrons discovered dancers were moonlighting, as it were. Especially if Nocturne has even a whiff of scandal or disrepute about it, which places like that often cultivate. He looked directly at me. Think about the conservative wing of the board. The damage to the company's reputation, to fundraising? It could be catastrophic. Armand would be livid. He picked up the Nocturne flyer again, turning it over. And places like this, they tend to be run by people who value discretion, often because they operate in gray areas themselves. He hesitated. I've heard a name connected to Nocturne's ownership. Dubois. Damien Dubois. Ex-military background, supposedly. Rumored to be absolutely ruthless in his dealings. Very connected. Very protective of his interests. Not someone you'd want to cross. Quote, Damien Dubois. The name meant nothing to me. But Alex's description added another layer of potential risk to whatever the dancers were involved in. This wasn't just about breaking company rules. They might be entangled with genuinely dangerous people. The conversation shifted then, inevitably, back to my primary responsibility. Look, Julian, Alex said, leaning forward again, his expression earnest now. This Nocturne angle. It's disturbing, and it definitely adds a whole new dimension of potential risk, and explains the fatigue, but it doesn't necessarily negate your original findings about the finances, does it? The shoe discrepancies? The supply issues Martha hinted at, the lack of transparency from management or finance, those are separate issues that still need solid answers. His gaze was sharp, assessing. Your instincts on that stuff are usually spot on. What do they tell you now? I ran a hand through my hair, feeling the full weight of the interconnected problems pressing down. They tell me it's a mess, Alex, I admitted, allowing my frustration to surface. A complete tangle. I have budget lines that suggest abundance, physical evidence, and first-hand accounts suggesting scarcity. I have exhausted dancers involved in some secret, potentially risky late-night activity at this place. Nocturne. I have a costumer stressed about allocations and quality issues originating upstairs. I have a finance department providing incomplete data and slow responses. I took a ragged breath. How do these pieces fit together? Is the potential moonlighting at Nocturne causing the shoe wear, and someone is covering it up by inflating the budget? Or are the financial issues separate, incompetence, or deliberate mismanagement, maybe even fraud, and the dancers are driven to Nocturne because they aren't being adequately supported or paid by the company. Or are both things true, feeding into each other? The pressure I felt wasn't just professional anymore. Elena's face flashed in my mind. Her fiery defense in the corridor, the vulnerability I'd glimpsed. Was her anger justified defensiveness for colleagues pushed too far by a failing system? Or the panic of someone whose dangerous secret was close to being exposed? The need to know felt urgent, personal, clouding my objectivity in ways that made me deeply uncomfortable. My father, I continued, voicing the external pressure, expects clear analysis, actionable data for the Foundation's next funding review, and for the board oversight. It is. He expects me, as CFO of his division and the family liaison here, to provide clarity. Right now, I gestured helplessly with my hands. All I have are anomalies, rumors, evasiveness, stressed staff, exhausted dancers potentially involved in God knows what at Nocturne, and this cryptic flyer. I picked up the black card again, staring at the silver symbol. How do I present this as a coherent assessment of the company's health and efficiency? I let my own frustration hang in the quiet, expensive air between us, watching Alex closely. The easy confidence was gone from his expression, replaced by a deep, thoughtful frown as he processed everything I'd laid out. He didn't dismiss it. He didn't offer platitudes. He seemed to genuinely grasp the complexity and the potential seriousness of the situation. He leaned forward again, resting his elbows on the polished table, his gaze meeting mine directly. "All right," he said finally, his voice low and serious. "You're right to be concerned, Julian. Deeply concerned." He nodded slowly. "You've got legitimate issues here, spanning multiple areas, financial discrepancies of the kind you're hinting at, plus potential behavioral issues, whether driven by necessity or something else, impacting the company's resources, reputation, and crucially, the dancers' well-being. That falls squarely within the board's oversight responsibility. It isn't just about trimming fat. This sounds like something potentially rotten." Hearing him validate my concerns so explicitly sent a wave of relief through me, loosening a knot of tension I hadn't fully realized I was carrying. I wasn't just chasing shadows or letting my analytical tendencies run wild. Alex saw it too. "Given the sensitivity," he continued, choosing his words with care, "and the apparent lack of transparency you're encountering through official channels, a cautious approach is definitely warranted." He considered for a moment. "I can't intervene directly in your financial deep dive. That's your expertise as CFO and committee liaison, and frankly, you have the standing to demand access. I don't. Going through official board channels prematurely might just alert whoever's benefiting from the current opacity." He grimaced slightly. "Armand can be brilliant, but he dislikes unpleasantness, especially if it might disrupt his artistic plans or donor relationships. And some of the older board members are more interested in the prestige than the operational details." He leaned forward slightly more, lowering his voice further. "But I can keep my eyes and ears open. Regarding board sentiment, any whispers, any resistance to your inquiries that seems disproportionate. Regarding Armand's political maneuvering, who he's aligning with, what his current pressures are." He picked up the Nocturne flyer again, turning it over before placing it back down. "And I move in circles that might overlap with the kind of crowd Nocturne attracts. I can ask some very discreet questions amongst people I trust. See if the name or the symbol rings any bells, what its reputation really is, who might be involved. No promises, but I can listen." He was offering support, cautiously. He wasn't dismissing me. He understood the political landscape of the board. His intelligence gathering on fronts I couldn't easily access. It wasn't a promise to charge into battle alongside me, but it was something significant. An ally, however cautious. A validation. "Thank you, Alex," I said sincerely. "That would be extremely helpful. Just knowing I'm not the only one sensing something isn't right makes a difference." "You're not," Alex confirmed quietly. "The company feels strained this season, more than usual. It's subtle, but it's there." We finished our drinks in a more companionable silence, the intensity of the conversation ebbing slightly. We touched briefly on less sensitive board matters, the search for a new development director, preliminary discussions about the next season's repertoire, restoring a semblance of normalcy to the meeting. We explicitly agreed that the core of our discussion, the financial anomalies, the dancer fatigue, Nocturne, remained strictly confidential between us for now. As we prepared to leave, gathering our coats, Alex paused, his expression turning serious again. "Just be careful, Julian," he said, his voice low but carrying weight. "Digging into established institutions, especially ones involving significant money, old alliances, and artistic egos. Sometimes you uncover things people really don't want found, things they might go to considerable lengths to keep buried." He met my gaze. "Reputations are fragile things, both personal and institutional. Tread carefully." His warning, delivered calmly but with undeniable gravity, landed with force. It echoed my own nascent concerns but amplified them. This wasn't just about uncovering inefficiency anymore. It was potentially about confronting deliberate actions, protected interests. We shook hands, wished each other good night, and I left the warm, quiet sanctuary of the Oak Room, stepping back out into the cold night. The air felt sharp, clean against my face after the bar's closeness. The snow had stopped, but the wind had picked up slightly, carrying the damp chill that promised frost by morning. The conversation with Alex hadn't magically solved the puzzle. The core financial investigation still lay squarely on my shoulders. But it had achieved something crucial. It had broken my isolation. My suspicions felt validated. Less like paranoid conjecture and more like legitimate concerns shared, at least partially, by another informed observer. Nocturne was real. A known entity in certain circles, and almost certainly connected to the dancer's late-night activities and exhaustion. I had a name, a focus point beyond just budget lines. The pressure for answers felt heavier now, more concrete, but the path forward, while still obscured, felt slightly less lonely. Alex's offer to gather information on the social and political fronts was valuable. My immediate next step, however, was clear. While maintaining the public facade of the diligent CFO and board liaison, I needed to intensify my private investigation, focusing squarely on Nocturne. What was it? Where was it? Who ran it? Beyond the ominous name Dubois, and most importantly, what exactly was the connection to Veridian's dancers? And how, if at all, did it intersect with the company's suspect finances? I walked towards my car, the damp pavement slick underfoot. A crumpled Nocturne flyer felt heavy in my pocket, a tangible clue in a game of shadows. The thought of Elena, her fierce defense, her undeniable allure, was a persistent, complicating counterpoint in my mind. Finding the truth felt more critical than ever, for the company's integrity, for the foundation's investment, for the artists potentially caught in the middle, and perhaps, I admitted to myself, for understanding the contradictions embodied by Elena Laurent herself. The winter night felt vast, concealing, but I felt a renewed sense of purpose. The investigation had a direction. It was time to bring Nocturne out of the shadows.